Welcome to From Tree to Beam plus 40 Years, episode 2. And we're going to continue with show and tell, mostly because I need to clear the kitchen table. And I want to show you this one especially. Can you see across this right at me? You get a look here. You see how this axe is actually made in a curve. And it is curved just a little bit this way, but a lot this way. And this is the side which clearly was intended to go against the log. Depending on where the handle went in, you'd be left-handed or right-handed, whatever that means, and I don't really know. Your bevel, most of your bevel is on the outside, and I expect that's the way most of the old-timers and most people today look at a broad axe, and I just always done it wrong, and that's okay. Just remember that when you ask me how to do it, because the answer is I really don't know. And this is 6 pounds, which I think is probably a pretty good weight for a broad axe, and I think that's a very good head. Here is one of those evenly beveled. See, these I've never ground. These are all pieces I've accumulated after I had all the axes I needed to work with. This one's not quite evenly beveled. And these are these big axes, and I don't know what they were used for. Obviously this was pounded, it's probably used to split wood at some point. But I don't know what whether these were considered to be for felling and hewing. The distance between the eye and the cutting edge of the axe is quite extreme, and so some people call these felling axes. They think they have something to do with getting deep into the tree for notching. I doubt it. You can get it deep into the tree. If you notch a tree, you can get as deep as you want by 7 inches from the beginning of the handle here to the edge, and it weighs 7.5 pounds, which is too big for a chopping axe. So I don't know what this is, but there's a lot of them around, and I wish I did know. I'm sure you could hew with it if you wanted to. Here's an interesting one. Take a look at that. Do you see how this head is bent in this direction? And again, it's ground way back down to about here, just a little bit. And is it curved? Not quite curved. But this is obviously the flat side, but it is not perfectly flat. And it is obviously intended for this side to be against the tree, and this side is your bevel. And if I had discovered, if I had these axes when I began, I'd be using one with the flat side to the tree. Now the question is, was this head bent like this in its manufacture, or did some user bend it afterwards? And if you look at it, my guess, I mean, it's obviously a welded axe. I mean, there's your weld in the center. It's a butterfly axe. And also, if you'll notice here, very commonly the end of the head, this is known as the head of the axe. There's a place in northern Maine, an axe with only one bit, which is simply called a head axe. The head is a harder piece of steel, which is welded to the back commonly. So here is another case, and I think what this shows us, is that a lot of hewers had trouble with an absolutely flat side towards the wood, and as you noticed, I put my absolutely flat side away from the wood. So I had trouble too. And So I think that is the lesson here in antiquity, as it were. Here's another lesson from antiquity, and this is a very important lesson. This is a massive thing, Salisbury cast steel, but it is definitely a butterfly axe, folded and welded, and it has, oh my goodness, look at that curve. I'll turn it like the other one, okay? All right. You see this curve here? Obviously, this is the flat, quote, flat side, intended to be against the wood. No other, you couldn't use it any other way, it'd be curved out. So this curve here, and you notice it's beveled way back here just a little bit, so that it's actually going to cut. It's going to take out those perfect flaky chips that leave behind the texture that we know, we see in hand-hewn beams. And oh my goodness, what a beauty. But of course, the eye is ruined. And this is the lesson. Let's weigh it. I've been asked how heavy can a broad axe be. Wow, this one's almost 9 pounds. Beautiful axe, and probably as heavy as an axe should be. It's been hammered here, and that would be to get it off the handle sometime. It's very soft metal. As an iron axe, it says cast steel, but it's early cast steel, and it certainly doesn't have a whole lot of carbon content. The carbon content's going to be in the hard steel on the edge. So here is the lesson. This axe, this is a standard principle, is tools which have stopped being used go through a period of abuse. They sit around in the barn, nobody uses them for a century, but they're there. And what happened to this axe, I can tell you just by being Sherlock Holmes here, is it was 1927, it was the middle of the Depression. This house was right here, occupied by, this didn't come from our farm, it came from the flea market. This house was right here, occupied by my ancestors. My father was a kid. He was born in 1911. And the farm produced about $100 a year. Everybody was poor in those days, in this neck of the woods certainly. And it was late in the winter, and all the easy firewood to split had been split and burned, and somebody needed to heat the house and needed to split something that was not going to split easily, or a bad piece of firewood with a knot in it or something, with a steel wedge. And somebody had already broken the handle off of the sledgehammer, and so the only thing left heavy enough to drive a wedge was this old broad axe. And so they began driving wedges to split wood with this old broad axe. And because the head itself is so heavy, and the material that makes the axe is so soft, which makes a beautiful axe, as I told you last time, is the iron axes fall dead, and they're wonderful, especially if they're sharp as a tack. You understand your broad axe is going to be as sharp as your pocket knife. There's no compromise on how sharpness of a broad axe is going to be seriously sharp. And so the eye was squashed. And the second point I want to make is there is nothing wrong with this axe. Sure, a competent smith could restore the eye and put it back into shape. I wouldn't recommend even bothering because this axe can be used to hew beams joyfully for the rest of your life without ever touching the shape of this eye. Just make the handle fit. And that is an important point. In hewing, the handle means very, very little. Don't obsess about your handle. Your handle is simple and not important. The hewing axe is a trimming tool. you could almost use it without a handle. Well, that would be silly, but it's not. You need to obsess about the handle of your chopping axe. The handle of your hewing axe is not important. Speaking of which, here come a few axes that I never used. Here's another one that certainly needs to be ground. Look at the handle. It was made by a very crude craftsman. And see this here? I think that must be wood, but he's obviously used probably plastic wood or some kind of, yeah, it looks like it might be two-tube epoxy, but I doubt they had it back in those days. To stick it in, and it's in there good enough, I guess, but that's a lovely axe. And who cares about the handle? Let's take a look at this. It looks like it's, oh my goodness, it's just slightly curved out here, isn't it? It's interesting. This is getting to be pretty typical. And since your questions have been how heavy a head and come on, how heavy a head and how long a handle, this is a not quite 6 pounds, and the handle from here is about 20 inches, and that looks about right to me. It's a pretty uncomfortable handle, but who cares anyway. Okay, take a look at that one. That's a nice classic axe. And oh, there is the weld, where the steel is welded in, and not in bad shape. I've never touched this one. The handle is a white oak handle. Again, no knob on the end. That's 2 in a row with no knob on the end of the handle. Of course, you choke up on a broad axe, so you're not really using the end of the handle particularly. Let's take a look at its configuration. All right, the bevel's on this side, and it's darn flat. It's darn flat, and gee, curved a little away. Now, if I was using this axe, I would use this side towards the wood. This side, I'm sure, if you use this side toward the wood, it would catch and make ugly marks. And as you've seen in my demonstration in the video, if you've gone back and reviewed that. So I don't like this axe much at all, frankly. But I think used with the bevel too, it would probably do an effective job at hewing. Certainly wouldn't have been my favorite. All right, here's one. This has got some age on it, doesn't it? That's a white oak handle. That's a chopping. That's lovely. The end of the handle. Can you see that? There are terms for these handle ends. I don't think they mean much. Let's take a look. Okay, there's the weld. There's the weld, and here, this is steel and this is iron. And let's take a look at its geometry here. This is obviously the flat side, and here is the beveled side. And I would probably be using this one, bevel in too. I've seen quite a number of handles with a bend here. Instead of a knob on the end, a bend there. Seems to be a local style. And this is a lovely light. I didn't weigh that last one. Don't need to weigh them all, I guess. This is a lovely light axe. It just pleases my hands to hold it. It's very thick. It needs to be ground down a lot. And it's beveled more on this side than that side. This is probably the flat side. And there's lots of steel in here. So I would probably bevel this back a ways and grind it a little bit to a curve. And then use this side towards. But this axe needs to be reground quite seriously. But a nice size. 5 pounds, less than 5 pounds, and I would say 4.5 pounds. This is more than that. This is 4 3/4. 4.5 pounds is probably a minimum for a hewing axe. These axes are sometimes called trimming axes, and I would say 4.5 pounds is probably minimum. And so that's about as small as they would be conveniently. This handle is very long. And I guess somebody looks like it's original, and somebody must have used it, but that's 24 inches. beauty. That's a bent handle, as you can see, and a nicely shaped axe. Let's see what we got here for geometry. Here again is, you can see the whole head is bent. This is obviously the flat side and obviously intended to be against the tree, and you can see how the whole blade is bent that way. It's another way to avoid this problem of the axe catching in the wood as you hew, and it's not curved this way, but it's curved that way, and that would be a very effective tool to hew with. Wouldn't it be nice to have about half a dozen of these all sharp and tuned up nice, and just try one after the other? Wouldn't that be fun? Wouldn't it be nice to have a museum where a fellow like you could walk in and there'd be a log all set up ready to hew, and you could go from axe to axe to axe and just hew away and dream on? But wouldn't it be nice? That's a lovely, lovely tool. And of course, the handle is bent away from the tree, which is on this side. And my feeling about the bent handle is I've never cared one way or the other. With the straight handle, I never bark my knuckles. If I worry about it, I wear gloves anyway. And I have three other axes to show you just because they're local and interesting. These are fence post axes. A fence post axe is you can see how old that one is and how it's hand forged. A fence post axe is a mortising axe. It's a primitive country style of mortising axe. The English mortising axe is really a chisel with a stick in it, and it's flat on one side, and one man holds it and one man drives it with a mallet, which is probably how these were used too. But in my childhood, I remember in the 50s as a child that there still were split rail fences, original split rail fences, and the posts of these fences had holes chopped clean through them, and the rails slid through, especially the gate. The rails would be skived up quite a way, so you could slide the rail and then set it down at an angle and drive the cows in and out and move the hay rack through and so forth. And as I was a kid in the 50s, they were just nobody was repairing them. They were just being replaced with barbed wire. And the barbed wire, of course, was stretched across and hooked over a pole with a loop. And there would be two poles. You'd have two poles together with barbed wire, and you'd loop one pole to the other and do the loop and pull it back and pull it forward. There were a few repairs of split rail fences, post repairs, where a post would be built up with 4x4s, short lengths of 4x4s nailed to two planks and set in the ground, and then the rails would go through there, but they weren't cut through, they weren't hewn through with a fence post axe. And I have three of these, so I'll just show them to you. There's one, and here's another quite old fence post axe. I guess you can see that all right, and beautiful thing, isn't it? They're very close. These are not ice axes. The ice axe had a hook on the back. There probably was a better name for it, but to reach out and grab the blocks of ice. But the ice axe looked a lot like this. It was narrow, and you see a lot of those around. I don't collect those. I don't collect anything. I just sort of have them. Ain't this a beauty? And here's a place to hammer with on bit. It's even bevel, and a guy could chop a mortise into a fence post. But my guess is one guy held it and one guy beat it with so the handle protected your hands. It's certainly not the right handle for it, not the original handle. And of course there is the old joke, you know, when I nod my head, you hit it anyway. So that's the end of show and tell, and I have a good deal more to say. How are we fixed for time? 10 minutes. Okay. The most important thing, and no one has asked this question yet, but somebody is bound to. And the question is, your video from Creative Beam teaches to leave the top on the tree and the base of the tree, if you're clever enough to fell it that way, hinged to the stump, and then hew two sides, and that way the log will not move. The log will not roll as you work it. And once you learn to hew, the only problem you're ever going to have is that log moving after you have begun hewing it. And that's what causes a beam to be twisted. And twisted beams, nobody wants a twisted beam. So how do you do this if you have a log off a truck in your backyard that does not have the top of the tree attached to it, that's not stuck on the stump? And that is the question I've been asked before. I haven't received that question from you guys recently, but I know it's an important question. And here's how I do it. Is I start with two balks, 6 by 6, at least 5 feet long, set on the ground very, very firmly. If you have access to custom lumber, a lumber sawmill, get them 6 by 10 or 6 by 12 and put them right down into the ground. You want because what happens is you're going to be dropping logs on these, and logs are heavy, and you don't want them to be shifting. And you want them to be parallel and level if you possibly can. And then you put your log on top of them, and then you roll your log around and find the place where your log wants to lie. Because just like all lumber, all logs have a crown. They're not straight, they're bent as it is. You know what a crown is. And you want the crown down, which is what natural. If you roll the log, the crown will finally find its way down. As you roll it around, trim off any bumps or knots or anything that happen to be over your balks. And the rest of it you don't need to worry about. And when you've found where the log wants to be, then strike a vertical on the end of it. Then roll the log up precisely half a turn where it does not want to be. So if you were to strike a vertical and you were to put a point pointing up at the sky, for instance, on the end of your vertical, you'd roll the log till the arrow pointed straight down. And you do this with a plumb bob or a level or whatever you like. And then that is the place where you use your log dog. And the only place where I would recommend, where I would ever use the log dog. You don't want to hew, let me stay with my story. So you dog the log in that place precisely where it doesn't want to be, and then right over your balks, you work a flat place on both, and right over each balk, you work a flat place any way you conveniently can. There's all kinds of ways to make a piece of wood flat, whatever you got. And when you think you got it about right, you knock your dogs out, and you kick the log, and it rolls back where it wants to be, and it goes dud, boom. And it sits in on those flat places you've made. And then you push it around, and if it's not absolutely stable, you think about it, and then you roll it back up and pin it, and work those flat places a little more until you think it maybe will sit better, and then you kick it over until it sits down, locks in like you wouldn't believe, until it really, really wants to be there. And that's where you hew it. And you don't tie it down, and you don't put a log dog on it. You see, if you dog a log and then chop at it, you're going to be pushing the lower part of the log away from your axe. 5 minutes. And sometimes it bounces back and sometimes it sticks. And if it sticks, you're out of round and you're hewing a barber pole. It doesn't take much to do it. So I never hew a log pinned. I always hew a log set where it wants to be. And now we're out of time, and we are to be continued. I'm Dan Dustin, and here's how you spell my name with an I. Find me on YouTube, where you probably are already. And this is to be continued, and I will have a little more to say on probably a shortened episode 3 coming up sometime soon. See you then.